Hello and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to paint watercolor koi fish in Procreate. Before we get into the project, the brushes that I am using are from my Water and Ink Procreate brush set. This is available to purchase at the link below. As with any of my tutorials, you can follow along with any brushes that you already have. If you want to follow along with free brushes, I offer a lot of free watercolor brushes on my website. Specifically for this, I highly recommend the Dark Seep brush, which is a freebie available to my newsletter subscribers, so you can get that when you sign up. I will also have that linked in the description below. While you're there, you can snag the color palette that we're going to be using today, which is the October 2021 palette. Kind of random, but it has the perfect orange for what we're doing. As far as brushes go, if you are following along with brushes that you already have, I want to show you what to look for in selecting a brush. So if you have a watercolor set from another creator or something that you've made yourself, or if you're using the brushes that come with Procreate, you're going to want something that is somewhat transparent, that allows you to either blend as you paint or at least vary the pigment by pressure. And so if you press harder, it gets darker. If you press lighter, it is more transparent. Ideally, choose one with a hard outer edge. So you can see here, this is darker, which is more accurate to the way that watercolor dries. I'll show you what that looks like with my free brush here, the Dark Seep brush. So you can see this has more of an edge texture, but you're 100% going to be able to achieve similar results with this brush or any other one that you choose. The other major aspect about painting watercolor digitally is having a paper texture. In my opinion, this makes the single biggest difference to the realism of what you create. So if I paint on this layer, you can see I have my paper texture, and when I hide it, so it makes a substantial difference in transforming your piece from digital watercolor to just watercolor. You can use any paper texture. Again, I have free ones available on my website, so if you want to check those out, you can. If you have other paper texture brushes, you can use those. So what I'm using is the paper texture that comes with this brush set, using my paper 2, and right now I have turned off the splatter options. If I turn them on, you can see this just adds some color variation and visual interest, but for now I'm going to skip that and just stick with the paper texture, and you can see the difference between these. I'm going with paper texture 2, which is a bit more of a subtle one. And then I have duplicated my painting layers. They should always sit below your paper textures. So we are going to start with a sketch. Before we get into sketching, I want to pull up Pinterest into side-by-side mode. To do that, I'm just going to swipe up from the bottom till my taskbar appears, and then I'm going to drag and pull Pinterest over to the side, and then I'm going to shrink it down so it only takes up a quarter of the screen. You can see I've already searched koi fish photography, and I like having several photos for reference so that I can get a better idea of the coloration and what fish look like from the angle that we're going to be drawing them, which is top down. As you can see from photos like this, koi fish come in a very wide range of colors. And then if we look more closely at them, you can also see, in addition to this thin, flowy tail, they also have this longer fin along their spine. Is that a dorsal fin? And then 2 fins in front and 2 more in back here. And they all are super thin and they just flow beautifully through the water. So this is really fun to paint in watercolor because the medium is really perfect for the subject. So now that we have a better idea of what these look like, we can get into sketching. Like I mentioned, I'm going to be using my October color palette and popping it out onto the screen just by pulling this little tab here. I can place it in the upper right corner. And I'm going to grab this dark gray to sketch with. You can use the default 6B pencil that comes with Procreate or another pencil if you have one that you prefer. And to sketch, what I'm going to do is I'm starting by drawing just an arc. Actually, that might be a little long, so I'm going to erase part of it here. Then I'm going to draw a second arc that is curved differently than the first. Then I'm grabbing the selection tool on freehand and repositioning one of these curves. Now to sketch the actual fish in, This curve represents the backbone of the fish, and so also the direction of the body. So what we're going to do is create this rounded head. If you want to start with a full circle here, you can, and use that as your jumping off point. And then connect these lines, tapering in towards the end of the tail. Then we'll do the same on the second fish. So drawing a circle, connecting a line from the circle, tapering towards the tail. Then to draw the tail, I'm just going to draw 2 longer ovals here and refine that shape by adding a pointed tip, connecting in the middle, adding a pointed tip on the other one, and connecting that back. Now I'm going to erase some of these internal guidelines, just so it doesn't confuse us too much. And then on the second fish, I'm going to draw 1 longer oval, and then instead of having this one be symmetrically placed, I'm going to foreshorten this, so they're going to be stacked kind of like a Venn diagram. Then I'm going to add these pointed ends onto the tail, and once more erase some of these guidelines. Then I'm sketching in these fins. I like to treat these fins kind of like how I draw leaves. They have a similar organic flow to them. So what these are 2 S curves tapered on both ends where they meet, and then wider in the middle. Then building off of the original line that I drew, I'm just going to pencil in the fin here. And then some of them, they seem to have almost like little whisker things. So we're going to pencil those in as well. Now we have our rough sketch. If you want to add in some lily pads or lotus flowers, things that you would normally see in a koi pond, I'm going to add in a couple lily pads. I'm just drawing some circles for placement and then cutting out a small wedge. All right, now that our sketch is done, we can move on to painting our watercolor. I am going to set this sketch layer's blend mode to linear burn and reduce the opacity to about 50%. And then on the layer directly below that, I'm grabbing my painting brush, which is the Smooth Paint and Blend brush, and this orange color. I'm going to start off at about 50% size. And then I am painting in some orange splotches along the body here. And just like in analog watercolor, the white is going to be negative space that we don't paint. And so as I'm painting this, I'm being careful to preserve things that I want to be white, such as this fin along the back. So much of the koi fish coloring is so modeled, so I'm really random in my placement of these colors. And then to build up color, because I want variations in pigment levels, this brush allows me to layer up the pigment, and from here I can just blend it out, so it doesn't have to be all in one brush stroke or just based on the pressure applied. This brush is pressure sensitive, so you can increase the pigment amount also just by pressing harder. Alternatively, if you want, you can layer multiple brush strokes and it'll still blend smoothly out for that real watercolor look. All right, I think I have enough of a sense of these that I'm going to close my Pinterest page. Grabbing this yellow, I am adding some of this in along the edges of where the orange fades into the white. Another thing about this brush is that you can use this as you paint with two different colors to mix the two together. Now I'm grabbing this light gray to help define some of the white areas. This isn't strictly necessary because we are going to be painting in a background, but it does help to add some depth and extra definition to the fish. Then to paint my lily pads, I'm grabbing this darker green color. Here I am varying the pigment and the opacity by adjusting my pencil pressure on the screen. Okay, so now I'm going to hide my sketch, and this will kind of tell me where I need to blend, where I might need to add a little more definition. Switching to the soft smudge blend tool, this comes with water and ink set. If you're using a different set, use a blender that's provided with that, or alternatively, if you want to use a brush that comes with Procreate, in the airbrushing panel, the soft blend brush is a really amazing blender and does a great job, so you can use that as well. I'm going to be using this soft smudge brush on the smudge tool to blend in some of the areas that I mixed pigments or soften some of the layered pigment where I wanted it to be really dark. I'm also going to fade out the fins a little bit here to kind of make them look almost like obscured. And this just helps give a more watery look. These lily pads are looking really dark, so something I'm going to do to lighten them up and just add more variation from light to dark is erase in a couple spots and then switching back to my blender, blending that in. Okay, so now we have our fish. Next, I'm going to move to my bottom layer and we can paint in our water. Still using the smooth paint and blend brush, I am selecting this blue color and I'm going to increase the brush size all the way up for starters. And just very roughly, I'm going to block in areas that I want to fill with this. So then I'm going to reduce my brush size a bit down to about 50%. And it is totally fine if you overlap with what you've already painted. You can always erase, that's why we're on a separate layer. However, these little gaps here are part of what adds to the realism. Switching back to the smudge tool as I go, I'm just going to soften some of these harder edges here. Okay, next we're going to add a bit of a shadow on the pond floor underneath the water. So first I have added a new painting layer in between my fish layer and my water, and I'm going to set the blend mode of this to multiply. And then I'm grabbing this same gray that we sketched with, along with the paint and blend brush, and setting the brush size to about 75. What I'm going to do is my light I am planning to have come from this direction, so all of my shadows are going to be offset on this side, and they're going to be pretty distant as far as shadows go to indicate some depth to the water. As I'm starting to block in this shadow, I'm carefully trying to paint right up to the body of the fish without crossing over into it. I'm also layering the color closer to the body and then blending to fade it out as it gets further away. If it starts to look really dark, don't worry too much because we will lower the opacity of this layer in a bit. Because the body has a lot of mass, but the tail and fins don't, they won't block as much light as the body, so for the shadow for these, I'm just ghosting in a little hint of a shadow with really light pressure. So now, if I go into my layers panel, I'm going to tap on the layer and decrease the opacity here to about 45%. I think that looks pretty good. I had almost finished this video when I realized that there is a water brush included in Procreate's Elements section that will give the effect that we're going to be drawing in manually next. However, it is in a slightly less watercolor style. So here's what that looks like in case you want to try it out instead, and let's get back to the rest of the original tutorial. Above my fish, I have this empty layer added, and I'm going to tap to bring up the blend modes, and I'm going to set this to the Add blend mode. While I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and drop my opacity down to 25% to start. Then I'm going to choose this creamy white color, and decreasing my brush size, I am going to paint in some curvy water highlights. What I'm doing here is using super light pressure as I go over the fish. I'm not drawing over the lily pads because those are breaking the surface of the water. Now I'm going in and connecting some of these curvy lines to create almost like a diagonal grid. Next, I'm going to tap the wand to access the adjustments menu, and then I'm selecting liquefy. From here in the bottom bar that pops up, I'm selecting one of the twirl tools, and I'm going to adjust my brush size here to about 70%. Now I'm going to tap the canvas to apply the effect. You can either tap multiple times, as I'm doing here, or you can kind of draw to drag the effect across a larger area. Feel free to play around with the different tool functions within Liquify. Here I have switched to the push option to nudge things around. I've also got the momentum setting set to max, and what this does is it carries the effect from where your pencil touches to the entirety of the canvas, so it's kind of like a ripple effect. If I set momentum to 0, the effect is much more controlled and restrained to the area that I'm drawing in. So while you do lose some control with momentum turned on, I think it enhances the liquid appearance of the effect. Alright, next I am tapping the layers icon to open the layer menu, and then I am going to decrease this layer opacity down to about 10%. Now, I originally had not planned to keep my sketch layer visible, but I am really liking what it adds to the piece. So since I'm keeping it, I do want to tidy it up a little bit. So with the eraser tool, which I have set to the default hard brush that comes with Procreate, it's in the airbrushing panel. My goal is to keep some of the character that the sketch gives while removing more of the harsher lines. This ideally will help the sketch mesh better with the painting. And that's it, that's the finished piece.